I kept thinking the worst part of my night would be scrubbing wing sauce off the flat top and counting 18 bucks in tips while the jukebox choked out a Springsteen song nobody asked for. Then everything changed fast. The rusted halo clicked from loud to lonely in under 10 minutes. June, my boss, locked the register, said, "Get home safe, kid." And I laughed, like that was a thing people actually get to do after 2 a.m. in Rosedale. I pulled my hoodie up, tucked my busted knuckles into the pocket, burns from the fryer, nothing heroic, and told myself 6 blocks to my aunt's place wasn't a big deal. I'd done it 100 times. What I didn't expect was how quiet the docks feel when the wind shifts and the tide pulls the smell of metal into your throat. That quiet can lie to you. It lied to me. I noticed the footsteps first because they didn't match the rhythm of the harbor. 3 sets, too quick, scraping rubber on wet concrete, and someone laughed like they were auditioning for a bad movie. I don't scare easy. I grew up between laundromat dryers and Port Authority bus lines. But there's a special kind of cold that slides down your spine when a voice you turned down earlier in the night shows up again in an alley without witnesses. "Hey, Halo girl," he called, bright like a grin. Brett Harlan, the kind of handsome that curdles when he thinks nobody can tell him no. He'd swaggered in at midnight with 2 friends, a Hennessy he didn't pay for, and a story about his dad on a committee that keeps this town alive. I told him we were closing, that tip jars aren't flirting jars, that I wasn't his entertainment after I clocked out. He looked amused then, now, under the sodium lights. He looked owed. I kept walking. That's important to say. I didn't freeze. I measured exits the way Aunt Rosa taught me. Left toward the marina, right toward Washington, straight into the mouth of trouble. And I picked the line with the most cameras. "Not interested," I said, calm, as if my mouth wasn't drying up. He moved faster. "You made me look stupid, sweetheart." That word hits different when there's nobody around. His buddy in a varsity jacket fanned out. The other one, Nico, chewed gum like it was a job. I thought about my rent. I thought about the hard drive zipped into the lining of my backpack and the scripts I still had to record for a podcast people thought was run by a team and not by me, whispering truth into a $40 mic with sirens in the background. My hand went to my phone. I didn't call 911. Rosedale taught me where certain calls go at this hour. I texted a number I only used when something felt wrong. Red Bridge. That's all. One word. A failsafe I never wanted to test. Brett grabbed for my arm. I twisted like Chef Miguel taught me when drunks got handsy. Pivot, heel down, elbow sharp. It bought me a step. Varsity jacket blocked the way. His cologne smelled like a discount mall in bleach. "Don't do this," I said, low, not pleading, just warning both of us. He smiled, a little tilt that meant he thought this was funny. And that's when things got messy. I won't catalog the hits. That becomes a different kind of story, and I refuse to give him that. I'll say the world went narrow and loud. A slap of light as my phone skittered. The sting in my right hand, my good hand, the one I used to find things in other people's trash data. Bright enough to make my eyes water. I tasted copper. I remember a cat bolting from behind a dumpster, and the fairy horn droning somewhere like it was calling someone braver than me. I remember thinking, stupidly, that I'd left a pan soaking and June was going to murder me if it rusted. "Say you're sorry," Brett hissed. So close I could smell whiskey mint, like he wanted an apology to fix whatever small thing I broke in him by saying no. "Sorry you can't buy me," I managed, and it came out more sure than I felt. That earned me another shove, my knee barking on concrete. I let out a sound I hope I never make again. He laughed. Nico laughed louder. And then a car door slammed somewhere near the mouth of the alley, and everything changed temperature. The men around me went weirdly still. Power isn't only money. It's the way air shifts around certain people. I didn't look up at first. I had blood and pride to manage. Then a shadow cut the light and a voice said, not loud, but like steel, "That's far enough." Cassian Vale didn't belong to the kind of men who shout first. You could tell by the silence he carried. Black coat over a black tee, shirt, no watch, hands open at his sides, like he'd had to teach them to stay that way. I'd seen him maybe twice at the Halo. He eats like a man who's been hungry, tips like he knows how long a dollar takes to earn, and people who think they own this town look at their shoes when he walks past. Brett's bravado hiccuped. "This your business?" he asked. Goading. Cassian didn't look at him. He looked at me. It was a quick inventory, pupils, breathing, the angle my hand hung, and for a beat I felt seen, not like a mess on the ground, but like a person whose pain had a name. "Do you want me to come closer?" he asked me, voice low enough that it didn't belong to anybody else. Consent matters, even at 2:13 a.m. in a dirty alley. I nodded, barely. "Okay," he said. "I'm going to step in." Things that could have happened next include a lot of cinematic nonsense. What actually happened was cleaner, and, in my opinion, scarier for the men who came to hurt me. Cassian didn't touch them. He did something with his eyes that told them about consequences in full sentences, and he tilted his chin just enough that a second figure detached from the darkness near the curb. A dock worker in a union jacket I recognized. Lenny, who'd been nursing a decaf at the Halo an hour earlier. Lenny didn't speak. He held up his phone. The screen glowed with the image of a license plate and a face. "Got your good side," he told Brett, as casual as a coffee order. Nico swore. Varsity cursed the wrong god. Brett tried a laugh that didn't land. The car behind them idled like it had somewhere else to be. "Leave," Cassian said, finally turning his attention their way. Not a shout, a verdict. "Walk. Don't run. Think about what you've already broken." They did what men like that do when someone rearranges the math. They left in a hurry that pretended not to be. My breath made that hiccup noise again. The alley smelled like oil and old fries. The wind picked up and my hoodie wasn't doing its job. Cassian crouched without making it a performance. "I'm Cass," he said, like we were at a church basement AA meeting and not a crime scene. "You're Sloane, right? June's girl who fixes the toaster by hitting it in exactly the right place." I almost laughed, which is ridiculous. "I'm going to help you up," he added. "It's going to hurt, and I won't do it until you say go." I thought of calling for an ambulance. I also thought about who picks up on nights when Captain Yates is holding court at the precinct. My hand throbbed like a bad bass line. "Not 911, I said. "There's a clinic." He nodded once. "Dr. Shaw, 2 lights over." He shrugged out of his coat and set it around my shoulders like something he'd done 1,000 times for people who weren't me. "Ready?" he asked. "On 3. I told him to wait. I twisted, reached for my backpack, and he paused while I got my fingers on the zipper under the liner. "I need my bag," I said, more fiercely than I meant. "I'm not losing what's in there." He didn't ask what. He just said, "Got it." Like a man who understands that sometimes survival is a hard drive. On 3, he lifted, not rough, not delicate either, just sure. Pain flared and faded and left me shaky. He held steady, gave me a second when I needed it, moved when I said move. Lenny stepped closer, slid a paper napkin into my free hand with a number scrawled in blue Sharpie, and the words "saw everything" in uneven caps. I stared at it, surprised by the suddenness of kindness. "People think nobody's watching," he muttered, eyes on the street. "But some of us still got eyes." Cassian nodded to him like payment. Then we were moving toward a dark SUV that looked like it had never known dust. The harbor cranes blinking slow red above us like giants taking their time to breathe. I asked him the question that had burrowed under my ribs the second he showed up. "How did you know?" He glanced at me, then at the road. "You texted a word that opens doors," he said, "and I keep a few open for my places. The Halo is one of them." There was no pride in it, just logistics. "We'll get your hand looked at," he said, and something unyielding crept into his voice, quiet and absolute. "And Sloane, nobody lays a finger on someone under my roof. Not ever." I didn't answer. I pressed the napkin in my fist like a talisman, felt the gravel of the alley fall away under the tires, and let the line between fear and fury harden into something I could finally use. I spent the next 48 hours pretending to be fine and building a wall. Dr. Shaw wrapped my hand, handed me a squeeze ball, and a warning about tendons. Use it or lose it, but don't be a hero. And Aunt Rosa made café con canela strong enough to make my eyes water. Slid a Rite Aid wrist brace across the table like an offering. I told her it was a kitchen accident. She knew better and chose love over interrogation. That's the thing about women who've lived through 3 recessions and 2 husbands. They triage with food and silence. I set up in the living room under the loudest radiator in New Jersey, the one that groans like a ship, spread out a cheap corkboard I'd dragged home from a school that closed, and started pinning the city to it. If I couldn't muscle what happened, I could map it. June dropped by before her shift with a bag of bagels and one of those blue gel packs meant for sports injuries. "I'm not asking," she said, eyes glossy and hard at the same time. "But if someone needs to be banned for life from every place I own, write the name down and slide it back to me like a bar check." I smiled without showing teeth. "Noted." When she left, I burned through the calm like kindling. I pulled plate numbers out of grainy stills from a parking lot cam I'd been scraping for months. Checked them against toll snapshots from the turnpike you can find if you know which procurement PDF to read, and stitched time to place until it started looking like a pattern instead of a bad night. I scraped gala photos from a donor's Instagram, located the copper balloon arch in the reflection of a water carafe, read the timestamp off the IGSIF like a confession, and drew a line between Brett's tuxedo and a truck that hit the scales at the port 3 hours later, carrying calcium supplement drums. I checked maritime AIS logs, because ships are like teenagers posting on Finstas. They think turning off one tag means nobody's watching, but their friends tell on them. A freighter did a lazy dog leg near the breakwater on nights that matched precinct overtime spikes approved by Captain Yates. I pinned him red, merino yellow, Harlan blue. Red bled into yellow into blue, until my wall looked like 4th of July gone mean, determined. Yes, but my chest was a low drum of anger I kept pushing down because anger makes you sloppy. I kept the tone in my head like I was talking to you on a long drive. Okay, here's what we know, here's what we can prove. Here's what we refuse to say out loud without documents. And every time my hand throbbed, I used the other and swore like a normal person about normal things, so I wouldn't start crying about the not normal ones. Around noon the second day, a Ko-Fi donation hit my no-signal page. $25 and a note. Check drums on Pier 6, top row, third from the end. No sender, just the default gray avatar. I stared at it until the little hairs on my arms stood up. I don't take tips like that at face value because that's how you step into holes someone dug for you. But it didn't read like a trap. It read like someone who didn't want to die was trying not to. I added a green pin. PIR 6, T3, end. 10 minutes later, my no-signal email pinged again, this time with something that made my stomach drop. You say Redbridge again, and we close every door you think is open. No signature. No header tells. But it used the word I texted that night. The one only 3 entities should have seen. Me. The number I sent it to. And whatever system waits on the other end of Cassian's invisible concierge. That meant either my phone was compromised, or someone inside his network wanted me scared. I took a picture of the email, printed it, pinned it black, and drew a question mark so big it looked childish. It worked. It made me mad instead of scared. Right on cue. Someone knocked twice the way people knock when they know you hate surprise visitors. Cass stood in the doorway like the building had invited him, a brown paper bag in one hand and a small hard-case Pelican box in the other. "I brought frozen peas," he said, holding up the bag, "for swelling, and this." He set the case on the coffee table and flipped it open. A travel keyboard with big, clicky keys, a roll, up wrist pad, a thumb, drive, sized thing I recognized as a hardware firewall, and a little black fob with a single button. "You're not moving me out of my apartment," I said, aiming for a joke and landing somewhere nearer to defiance. "I'm not here to move you," he said, eyes on the wall, like it was a mural he was trying not to judge. "I'm here to fit your work so it doesn't break the part of you that's already hurt." He glanced at my brace. I flexed on instinct and winced. "Dr. Shaw told on me," I muttered. "She told me to remind you, you're not made of rebar," he said, "and that she'll rewrap you tonight if you stop being stubborn for 15 minutes. He was careful with my space. He didn't step toward the board, didn't touch anything. He just leaned on the doorframe and breathed like a man learning how not to crowd a skittish animal. You have plates, he said after a beat. You have ships. You have a precinct captain who thinks he can autograph the clock. What do you need? Time, I said. A printer that doesn't talk to the internet. And for you not to read my notes unless I hand them to you. He nodded. Done. Done. And done. He tapped the Pelican case. The firewall is dumb plastic. You plug it in between your modem and your stuff, and it blocks most of the idiots. The fob goes on your keys. Push it if someone takes a bad angle at you. It pings my people, not 911. I lifted the fob, surprisingly heavy. Your people are leaky, I said, and handed him the printed email. He read it without changing expression, which told me a lot about the muscle he's built around reactions. Only a handful of phones get that word, he said quietly. It doesn't go through a switchboard. I'll find the hole. Find it slow, I said. If you patch it fast, whoever sent that knows I know. He almost smiled. You're irritating in exactly the right ways. You're welcome, I said. He set the email down like it might bruise and pointed with his chin at a green pin. Pier 6, you're not going there alone. I'm not going there at all, I said. Not until I can put a warrant or a camera or a press photographer on it. But I can find whoever checked that container in. People brag in small ways they think don't count. Worked a double, got overtime. Boss brought empanadas for the crew. The stuff that makes patterns if you listen from enough angles. He watched me build. I pulled a stack of county clerk PDFs off my laptop like card tricks. Property tax records that shouldn't have a PAX P.O. box listed. A Shell LLC that won a catering contract for the Harlan Gala with a Maritime Street address that belonged to a storage unit. Overtime rosters that lined up with the dogleg and the ship track. I tacked up a printout from state campaign finance showing a donation from an import wellness company that didn't exist before last spring, and a screen grab from a Yelp review where someone complained the wellness store wouldn't sell anything unless you had a code. June texted a picture of an invoice for a private room the night of the fundraiser. It matched a photo of Brett's reflection in a chrome warmer at precisely 11:14 p.m. Lenny came by after his shift, eyes bleary, hands raw, and tossed a spiral notebook on the couch. Plates, he said. Not all of them good. My memory's not a camera, but I know who walks in like they own the air. He lowered his voice. Union's got a vote next week. Marino's guy's been sniffing at it. You tell me if this helps or hurts that, and I'll steer clear. It helps workers, I said. It hurts one man who thinks workers are furniture. Good answer, he said. And for the first time since the alley, I felt something like pride shake off the dust. We ate cold bagels over the board like cops on a TV show. Cass didn't say much. When his phone buzzed, he ignored it, which told me where I ranked at least for the hour. At some point, he set a bottle of drugstore ibuprofen next to my keyboard and an ice pack on the arm of the couch so I'd stop pretending I didn't need it. The radiator banged. Aunt Rosa yelled at a game show on TV in the next room. Outside, a delivery truck beeped in reverse like a metronome, reminding me there's a world where people just keep going. I told Cass what I couldn't say to June or my aunt without making them carry it, that being called sweetheart in that alley is sticking to my ribs worse than the bruises, that there's a version of me who wants a bat more than a board, and that I hate her a little because she scares me. He didn't give me a speech about Zen or the law. He said, every man I've buried in my head started with that feeling. I don't feed it anymore. Then he touched the doorframe with 2 fingers, as close to a ritual as I'd seen from him, and said, I'll stand outside while you work. Not over you. Around you. I can handle myself, I said, about half true. I know, he said, entirely true. That's why I'm here. When he left the room, the air actually loosened. I turned back to the board, took a breath that didn't scrape, and pushed the pins farther. At some point soon, I'd have to walk back into public with this. Not as a girl in a hoodie, but as no signal with my name attached. Not yet. Tonight was for slow, quiet power, the kind that survives scrutiny. Before I shut my laptop, I checked the Ko-Fi tip again, stared at Pier 6, T3 end, until it felt less like a trap and more like a promise, and then opened a blank doc titled Ivory, Working Theory. I don't own a suit, so I went with a thrift store blazer that smelled like cedar and a pair of black sneakers I'd Sharpied the logos off. The Harlan fundraiser was at the Riverside Marriott, second floor ballroom with a step, and repeat banner and a silent auction table full of things only rich people need. Backyard pizza ovens, Adirondack weekends, a wellness basket from an import company nobody on Yelp had ever heard of. The donors wore that nervous, loud look rich folks get when they want to feel benevolent. I was crew, which is to say I borrowed a black lanyard from a busboy I used to split shift meals with and walked like I had somewhere to be. People don't stop you if you look mildly annoyed and slightly late. I'd done the homework. I knew the AV vendor, knew which union had the call, knew that IATSE guys protect their boards like altars. I wasn't touching a fader. I was touching something else, the fragile habits of people who love iPads. There's always an iPad running the stage timer. Tonight's was tethered to a little Apple TV taped to the underside of the lectern shelf. Gaffer tape, bless it. So the program director could see where she was. I'd mirrored that device at soundcheck with a throwaway profile and a name nobody questions. Client, timer. When the room lights dipped and the pledge thermometer animation started crawling up the screens like a church bake sale, my phone buzzed twice in my pocket. June's code for press near Halo, which I ignored because I was busy and terror makes you single, threaded. I gave myself a breath, the kind you take before a cold pool, and hit the button. It wasn't cinematic. The screens just hiccuped and swapped feeds. The thermometer froze mid-climb. The room muttered. And then the first slide landed like a brick. I didn't start with the worst. I started with something boring enough to be incontestable. A county clerk document linking a storage unit on Maritime Street to a Shell LLC that won catering you couldn't eat because it was a laundering line item. Then the campaign finance poll, then the overtime rosters with Captain Yates's initials looping through week after week like a bored teacher. Then an AIS track of a freighter doing a little dogleg around the breakwater on Thursdays. Same night, the union overtime spiked. People don't gasp at PDFs. They gasp it out. So the audio rolled, Yates on a call, office TV droning in the background, saying, "Move those drums on my clock. I'll sign the sheet. Don't make me chase signatures." And a second voice, Marino's right hand if my transcripts were right, saying, "Harlan's gala will cover any heat. Relax." You could feel the air swap molecules. Councilman Harlan had just finished telling a story about his dad teaching him to value hard work. He tried a laugh, small and brittle, and stepped toward the mic like maybe he could coach the room back into good feelings. The AV op killed his channel. A server, young, nervous, one of my people, caught my eye across the riser and shook her head a tiny bit like, "Don't you dare feel bad." I didn't. I felt steady. You know that feeling when you're holding a board you sanded yourself and there's a nail right where you need it and you hit it true? Like that. Security noticed me because security always finds the person who looks like they don't belong twice. A man in a too tight suit with an earpiece pointed at my badge and said, "Ma'am, credential." And I did the thing women like me learn at 16, smiled bland, asked for a restroom, and walked toward the sign. It bought me maybe 30 seconds. Enough to send Cass a single word, "On." He didn't text back. He doesn't when he's moving. On the screens, the deck flipped to money, transfers from a wellness importer that looked like a candle store on Google Maps but had steel shutters and a loading dock, invoices for calcium supplement drums, which could be true if calcium powder paid better margins than fentanyl. Brett did that thing he does when he's cornered, tries to turn mean into charm. "Hackers," he announced to no one in particular, like he was the dad in a sitcom who discovered a raccoon in the kitchen. "This is a felony." The people who write checks for a living started looking for exits. I waited for the part I didn't want to show anyone yet and showed it anyway. A folder icon with a little lock graphic and a single word, "Ivory." The padlock didn't open. It wasn't supposed to. The room hates unresolved symbols. It lives on certainty. I needed Harlan to go to bed tonight, full of questions that sweat out in the dark. They traced the feed faster than I hoped. The vendor used a control panel that logs mirrors by IP. And I guess I should have assumed their kid brother, who does computers, could read a network log. The hotel IT guy showed somebody a screen and a finger landed on an address that geolocated to the rusted halo. Because my mirror was bouncing through a Raspberry Pi in the back office that runs our internet radio when the jukebox dies. It was a safety if I got bagged. The stream would keep spitting without me. But it looked like the bar was the source. And bars make easier villains than daughters of home health aides. My phone lit with 3 messages in a row. June. Press out front. Lenny. Cops sniffing around. And a number I didn't recognize. Walk out now. I was already in motion. Moving through the hallway that smells like chafing fuel and carpet cleaner, when the server from earlier peeled off the wall and slid a black apron into my hands. "Wear this," she said without looking at my face. "They don't chase waitstaff." "What's your name?" I asked. "Because gratitude matters." "Maya," she said, and then louder like we were in a showig. "Excuse me, I need the lemons." And we parted like we'd rehearsed. I didn't make it to the service elevator before I ran into Cass. He was where exits become commitments. That thin slice of hallway where people decide if they're going public or not. He didn't touch me. He just took me in the way he takes in a loading schedule. What's broken? What's fixable? What needs a permit? "You good?" he asked. "Define good." "Standing, talking, stubborn," he said. "Good enough." Security thundered past us toward the ballroom. Somewhere behind me, a donor cried about cyber terrorism to a woman whose job is to reschedule embarrassments. Cass said, "They'll hit the halo." "They already did," I said. "We go now," he answered, like there was no other timeline. "No statements," I said, stomach cold. "June doesn't deserve to be the headline." "Then let's give them a different headline." He didn't say we'll fix it. He said, "Essentially." "Do you want the steering wheel?" I took it. The halo looked smaller, with a row of cameras pointing at it like rifles. June stood on the curb with her arms crossed and her bar towel thrown over her shoulder like a flag. She saw me, exhaled relief and rage in the same breath, and whispered, "I hate your guts, and I'm proud of you." In that order. The captain on the scene, not Yates, a different one with less hair and more appetite for being on TV, started to lift a megaphone like we were a parade. Cass stepped just enough into the frame that the megaphone lowered without anyone deciding to lower it. He glanced at me, not asking, but asking. My heart tried to climb out of my mouth. I stepped up onto the milk crate June uses to fix the chalkboard specials and spoke into the air without a mic because microphones make promises I wasn't ready to keep. "My name is Sloan Alvarez," I said, and the last name did the work I wanted it to do. Put me in a neighborhood, in a kitchen, in a school where the hall monitors know my aunt. I run a podcast called No Signal. Tonight's materials are documents anyone in the city could request if they weren't buried where regular folks can't find them. If you're going to write about the halo, write that it's a place I walk home from after putting food on a plate. I kept my voice even. Aunt Rosa in my ear. "Don't let them think you're begging." "I have more," I said, and watched 3 reporters glance at their producers like I'd set a fire. "Some of it is locked until I can hand it to people who won't lose it on purpose. One folder is called Ivory. You're going to want to ask elected people what that means before they tell you what I mean. Also, if anyone here tries to scare my boss or my neighbors, you'll be on the next episode." Brett arrived like a bad wind. He'd ditched the bow tie. The bravado was cracked. "This is slander," he said, picking a word his dad's lawyer probably told him at breakfast. "She hacked private equipment. She broke the law." I didn't look at him. I looked at the cameras because cameras tell different truth when you give them a better subject. If a bar back with a bus pass can connect the lines, imagine what the state can do with a budget, I said. Ask Captain Yates about his signature. Ask Councilman Harlan why a wellness importer sponsors his gala. The captain, different one, not crooked, just tired, shifted his weight, the way cops do when they'd like to be anywhere else. Cass stepped up then, not in front of me, just beside me, and said, "Ms. Alvarez is a witness. She's under my protection and the community's. Any attempt to intimidate her or this establishment will be recorded and prosecuted." I could hear the internet eating that line already. He didn't puff his chest. He didn't promise violence, he promised memory. It landed. A young guy with a press badge asked the only question that mattered. Why now? I looked straight into the camera because I wanted the girl who washes dishes at midnight 3 towns over to hear me without static. Because sometimes you pick the fight, I said, and sometimes it lands in your alley. Either way, if you don't stand up, it keeps walking. I climbed down off the crate because my legs were shaking and I didn't want to gift anyone that shot. June squeezed the back of my neck the way she does when I nail an order during a rush. Cass didn't say a word until we were inside. Doors latched. The bar suddenly small and familiar again. You showed them ivory, he said. Not quite a question. A padlock, I said. People dream about what they can't open. He nodded once. We're going to need time. You just bought us. We're going to need a cleaner printer, I said, trying for light. He didn't smile, not fully, but his eyes softened around the edges, the way eyes do when men remember something they miss. We'll get you one, he said. And then his phone lit with a number he didn't like and he let it ring out. The cameras outside kept talking to each other. Inside, the chalkboard still said wings $8 in my handwriting. I stood under it, shook out my sore hand, and understood that the part where you tell the truth is the easiest part. The hard part is what you choose to do next while everyone watches. By morning, the story had a name and it wasn't mine. Bartender hacker crashes gala crawled across the local news chyron like I'd set fire to a church. Talk radio took turns calling me a menace and a martyr depending on ad breaks, and a blogger with a flag in his bio called the Halo a criminal nest, which made June snort coffee up her nose and tape a handwritten sign to the door that said, "We're closed to nesting, open to tipping." The part that got under my skin wasn't the noise, it was the precision. Cops showed up with a warrant that read like someone had handed them a map to the back office router. They didn't trash the place, too many cameras, but they pawed through our cabling with latex hands, asked questions in that tone designed to make you say something stupid, and left with a box full of things that weren't the things. June stood arms crossed, bar towel over her shoulder like a small flag of a stubborn country. You good? She asked after they rolled out. Define good, I said, and we both laughed the dry kind. Harlan's PR machine went to work. He did the local morning show with his sad dad voice, said words like cyber and villain and safeguard, while his son stood behind him trying to look like a person who opens doors for grandmas. Brett's lawyer sent a letter to the Halo that might as well have been titled, "We suggest you be very afraid." Aunt Rosa slapped a post, it over the TV that said no news until after coffee, and handed me a paper bag with a devotion candle and a lottery scratcher, like she could force the universe to pick a lane. Online, my inbox filled with strangers. Some sent prayer hands, some sent threats, some sent recipes for detox drum smoothies, which I would have found funny if my hand didn't throb every time I reached for the mouse. I told myself pressure finds cracks. I was not going to give it one. Cass called a meeting that veiled logistics that he didn't call a meeting. Men like him don't line people up and make speeches. He stood at the end of the long table facing a wall of windows that looked over the cranes and said, "We're done with Marino." A handful of his people shifted like someone moved the floor. Rizzo, his oldest enforcer, hands like he'd broken things for a living, looked like Christmas had been canceled. "You want to let him take food off our plates?" Rizzo said, stepping into it. "Or you want me to make a call?" Cass didn't look at him. "We don't touch civilians," he said. "We don't touch cops. We don't touch politicians. We touch paperwork." That landed harder than any threat. "You can't audit a man like Marino?" Rizzo spit. "You choke him." "We're not choking anybody," Cass said, and there was a quiet in the room that had nothing to do with fear. It was a line, drawn. We keep our dock clean and take the loss. Short term. His CFO, woman in a gray suit with a pen that clicked when she was nervous, cleared her throat and said, "Short term looks like 6 figures." He nodded. "We pay it." I watched him absorb the hit like a boxer who learned how to roll with punches. People who live by other people's fear don't love a boss who refuses to be scary. Cass chose it anyway. Later, in the hallway, he said, "You don't build anything worth living in on blood." I've tried. He didn't look at me when he said it. He looked at the river. My phone pinged with a text from an unknown number while we were arguing about printers. Nice route to Dr. Shaw, 11:20. You waved to cameras for fun? I hadn't posted, hadn't told June, hadn't even told Aunt Rosa because she'd show up with a wooden spoon and shame the precinct on the sidewalk. There were exactly 4 people who knew I was going to the clinic. Me, Dr. Shaw, Cass, and Klein. The new guy running the night rotation on my block, because we're not putting a tail on you, Sloan. We're putting a net under you. Somebody in the net had a leak. You learn things from doing OSINT that come in handy in real life. I set 3 canaries. Canary A was a fake calendar invite to meet the ADA at 2 p.m. behind the county courthouse. I sent it to Theo in Ops with a note. Don't tell Cass yet. I want a clean read. Canary B was a fake text to Marco, Cass's driver, saying I'd swing by the pier at 3:30 to pick up a USB. Canary C was a casual, I'll run to the pharmacy at 4:15 by the jug handle. Don't worry about it, that I said out loud to Klein while I was tying my shoe. At 4:12, a cruiser idled by the jug handle like a shark that didn't want to admit it was following a scent. I felt my heart do that drum line it does when the pattern slots into place. I didn't confront Klein. I wrote the time down on an index card and slid it into my pocket and told myself to breathe through the part where your trust gets stupid. I did something else I'd been promising myself. I showed up at a trauma-informed self-defense class at the community center, where the paint always smells like last summer. The instructor was a woman in her 50s with a sleeve of roses and the kind of voice that makes teenagers stop smart, mouthing. Rule 1, she said, no fair fights, survival beats honor. She had us practice the ugly stuff that keeps you alive, fingers to eyes, keys as a rake, how to say no like you mean end of sentence. She clocked my brace, pulled me aside, showed me how to generate power from a knee without trashing my hand, then said, softer. Practice leaving. She meant it physically, but I heard the other thing too. Dr. Shaw hooked me up with a sliding scale counselor who didn't ask me to talk about the alley before I wanted to, who gave me this sentence. You don't have to be brave to keep living. You have to be consistent. I wrote it on a sticky and stuck it above my laptop where the radiator hisses like a snake guarding a door. Meanwhile, June's cousin, who works nights in hotel IT, sent me a message from a Proton account with an attachment, an audit log that showed my mirror at the gala bouncing through the halo exactly like I planned, and, more importantly, a secondary connection labeled AV Assist that opened 20 minutes before my stream and closed 30 after I killed it. Kid Brother had indeed poked the network. He'd also left greasy fingerprints. I added it to a folder I named for a saint my grandmother loved. It felt right to let a ghost keep watch. Lenny dragged me to a union meeting in a hall with drop ceilings and coffee that had been killing stomach lining since the 80s. Marino's guys showed up in fresh work boots and dead eyes, sat in the back, and looked bored. I made a 5-minute case to a room full of people who can smell performative faster than any focus group. I didn't say fentanyl. I said funerals. I didn't say corrupt. I said signing overtime sheets that send you out to die. And I told them what I knew for sure, that clean docs mean fewer ghosts and steadier paychecks, that somebody who tries to make you furniture doesn't mind when your legs break. Lenny didn't clap. He nodded once, slow, like he was moving a heavy yes from somewhere deep to somewhere public. It was better than applause. That night, Cass and I stood in Aunt Rose's kitchen, which smells like bleach and cumin and safety, and argued in loops that weren't really about printers or canaries or cash flow. You bench Klein, Beth, I said, sliding the index card across the table. You don't break him. He gave you away, Cass said. No heat. Just a kind of exhausted disappointment that sounded older than he is. He gave me a schedule, I said. He didn't touch me. If you make a spectacle, the next guy won't leak to scare me. He'll leak to hurt me. He closed his eyes for a second, and you could see the weight of not doing the easy thing sit on his shoulders like a barbell. Rizzo's going to hate this, he murmured. Rizzo doesn't set your ethics, Ina said, and it came out tougher than I felt. He huffed something like a laugh. No, he said. You do? He benched Klein, quietly. He kept him on payroll, moved him to vehicle maintenance, told him the why in a room with one chair. I know because later Theo texted me 3 words. Clean, slow, done. We released a statement that didn't read like a statement. Vail Logistics is conducting a third-party audit of dock operations and security protocols. We welcome scrutiny. It cost money and goodwill. And it was the first time I believed Cass fully when he said he was trying to build a life he wouldn't be ashamed to show a kid. The smear campaign didn't stop. A podcaster who says patriot a lot read my old tweets like tea leaves and decided I hated small businesses because I once complained about DoorDash fees. Someone mailed Aunt Rosa a padded envelope with nothing in it but a photocopy of my high school yearbook photo. Brett posted a video from a gym in compression shorts about standing firm against lies. I didn't respond. I ate Wawa hoagies and filed open records requests and taught myself to sleep with a white noise app that sounds like a box fan in a cheap motel. The Ivory folder sat on my desktop like a dare, and every time I hovered over it, something mean in me wanted to click and blow it all at once. Instead, I did something boring and adult. I built chain of custody logs like my life depended on it, because maybe it did. Late, after Aunt Rosa went to bed and the radiator clicked like it was cooling a rocket, my phone lit with a voicemail from a number that didn't exist 10 minutes earlier. A man's voice, calm like a bank, recited the street where I lived when I was 9 and the color of the bike my mom bought me at a garage sale. He hung up without threatening me. He didn't have to. I sat very still in the glow of the stove clock and listened to my heartbeat and thought about that self, defense teacher saying practice leaving. And then I did my version. I opened a new doc and labeled it Ivory, Bait. I built 3 copies of the folder with 3 tiny differences. 1 extra comma in a bank name, 1 misspelled vendor, 1 photo with 3 pixels shaved off a corner, and I sent each to a different place, a reporter I trusted, a federal tip line, and a city server I knew Yates read on nights he thinks nobody's watching. I closed the laptop, set the little black fob Cass gave me next to my keys, and told myself out loud like a person saying grace. We keep our hands clean. We play the long game. We don't break before they do. Outside, a freight train wailed low like a warning or a promise, and for the first time since the alley, I felt something under the pressure that wasn't fear. It was a choice, and I made it again. I didn't crack Ivory with a miracle. I cracked it the way you fix a stuck drawer. You jiggle, you breathe, you stop trying to rip it open, and you pay attention to where it's catching. The bait folders did their quiet work first. The version with the extra comma in the bank name got a nibble from a city IP after midnight, Yates's usual hunting hour. The misspelled vendor drew a click from a wellness domain that only exists on Tuesdays when invoices get washed. The photo with 3 pixels shaved off got opened on a private hospital network that charges $28 for a band, aid, and calls it standard of care. 3 nibbles, 3 trails that smelled like bleach. I put green pins on the board and felt something like hope, the cautious kind you hold in 2 hands so you don't drop it. The name wasn't poetic. Ivory was an operating file, a ledger cooked clean. IV as in intravenous. Ori like inventory, with the middle ripped out. The play was simple and awful. Import calcium supplement drums through the free port so they don't get real eyes. Relabel certain shipments as medical equipment. Loop cash through a hospital foundation and a recovery program. And churn it out the other side as sanitary philanthropy. You know that particular American flavor of evil where somebody wears a ribbon while they count? That. The proof wasn't in a smoking gun, it was in the mundanity. Purchase orders with CPT codes that didn't match what was on the manifest. A foundation gala photo where the CFO posed in front of a pallet with a tracking number you could read if you knew how to squint. A billing cycle that matched the dogleg nights at the breakwater. I built a wall that said, if it isn't this, it's something worse. When I told Dr. Shaw what I thought Ivory was doing, she went very still in that way doctors do. When a memory lands on a nerve, she asked me to walk with her. No scrubs, no clinic, just two women in a strip mall parking lot watching a kid learn to ride a bike in a helmet with dinosaurs on it. "You remember Marisol?" she asked, then watched my face like she was checking vitals. I did. Cass's sister. The ghost nobody says out loud around him, because grief is a house you enter on your own schedule. "Her autopsy says overdose," Dr. Shaw said. Not dramatic, just plain, like reading a label. Except she was in the ER for a kidney crisis. They hung a bag. 10 minutes later, her heart lost the plot. The bag batch got pulled the next quarter, quietly, under a different lot number. We filed. We were told to put it down. "No direct line," the lawyer said. "The hospital wanted me to sign a non-disclosure so I could keep privileges." She laughed, short and mean. "I kept my mouth. I kept my charts. They don't own my eyes." She handed me a photocopy, lot numbers, initialed by a pharmacist with a neat hand. And I felt heat climb my neck, not because of what it meant for the story, but because of what it meant for the man who keeps teaching his hands to gentleness when the rest of him remembers other ways. I asked the only fair question. "Do I tell him?" She looked at the sunset like it might help. Not until his face tells you he can hear it as medicine, not as a match. The plan came together on the world's least romantic whiteboard at Vail Logistics under a flickering fluorescent that refused to be replaced because the building super says bulbs should live a full life. I wrote 3 columns and tried not to think about how my handwriting looks like a lifeguard's whistle pattern. Track 1, feds. No grand gestures, we build a chain of custody for every digit and hand it to a U.S. attorney who has more to lose than we do if it disappears. Track 2, press. Not the outlets that sell drama, the ones with patience and a lawyer on retainer who loves footnotes. Track 3, bait Marino. Not with bodies. With a container he thinks is his. We mark it. We track it. We let him pick it up with his favorite middleman so nobody can cry entrapment. "Paper cuts, not bullets," I said. "Death by 1,000 audits." Cass listened like he does when he's measuring a distance. Rizzo stood with his arms crossed like my whiteboard had insulted his mother. Theo flicked through a tablet and muttered about paperwork like a prayer. "We can put a tracker under shock sensors," Theo said. "Looks like part of the chassis. Pops a ping when the door opens." "We're not letting a kilo of anything move," Cass said. That quiet conviction that scares people used to yelling. "We seed it with nothing. Make him come for empty air." "He'll smell a trap," Rizzo said, contempt curling. I thought about the kid on the dinosaur bike, knees knocking. "He'll smell arrogance," I said. "People like Marino don't smell traps. They smell entitlement and call it oxygen." I carried track 2 myself because I don't like watching other people carry my fire. I met a reporter in the back booth of a diner where the pie has been trying to dry out since 1995. She'd grown up on the same bus lines I did and wore her hair like she couldn't be bothered to care what you thought about it. I slid her copies that wouldn't sink us. Nothing that would collapse the case if some city desk editor got itchy and hit publish too early. "I need time," I said, and it came out like a request and a dare. "I need patience," she said back. "I need you not to get scared and dump it all on Twitter because your adrenaline is smarter than you." "Deal," I said, and meant it. We tapped cups like ceremony. She asked me what I wanted if the story went the way I prayed it would. I told her the truth and watched her eyes go soft for the first time. I want fewer funerals where pastors lie about the deceased being in a better place because nobody knows what else to say. We set track 1 up in a church basement because I believe in symmetry. If you're going to out a slush fund that washed itself clean through a hospital and a free port, you should carry it into a room with folding chairs that smells like coffee and Lysol and forgiveness. A woman from the U.S. Attorney's Office shook every hand like it mattered, asked for originals like a person who knows what defense attorneys do for sport, and didn't correct me when I called her ma'am because I was raised right. I watched Cass watch her, and I saw him move a puzzle piece in his head. These are the people who will either save us or fold us into their next job change. And he didn't flinch either way. He put his signature next to mine on a receipt that said, in dodgy ballpoint, 1 thumb drive plus 1 printed packet plus supplemental exhibits AAF. And for a weird second, I wanted to frame that more than any diploma. Baiting Merino meant trusting a federal team I didn't know, and a dock pattern cast nose like his own heartbeat. We listed a dummy container under a top sheet LLC that looks like one of his feeders, stamped it with a bill of lading that would make sense to a man who doesn't read, and parked it at the end of Pier 6 like a shiny apple under a bad tree. Theo's device sat under the shock sensor, waiting. We didn't text, we didn't email. We wrote times on napkins and burned the napkins over a sink like teenagers playing at being spies. Rizzo hated everything about that week. Every time he walked past me, he looked like he wanted to flick my ear. "You're going to get people we like hurt," he said once, low. "Or you're going to make a story I can't fix." "I'm not making a story," I said. "I'm making a record." He didn't answer. He rarely answers when the math tells him he's not the main character. I told Cass about Marisol the night before we set the apple out. Aunt Rosa had gone to bed. The apartment smelled like onions and bleach, and the Mets losing by 2. I put the photocopy on the table and sat on my hands so he couldn't see them shake. He read it once, then again, then turned it face down like people do when a thing is too bright. He didn't speak for a while. The radiator hissed. A car alarm did that dumb little burp it does before it decides not to go off, and somewhere a neighbor laughed like relief. When he finally talked, his voice did the thing a bridge does in winter, tightens to hold. "The part of me that knows how to make this stop isn't the part of me I promised you I'd be," he said. He looked at the ceiling like he might find air up there. I can't carry both. I wanted to say something wise about forgiveness or faith or the American judicial system, but all I had was practical. "Then don't carry both," I said. "Carry the one that gets me and Lenny and June to next year. Carry the one Marisol would recognize if she walked in the door." He blinked, and it looked like pain, and it looked like love, and it looked like a man choosing a smaller weapon, because it doesn't kill strangers on the way to the target. He tapped the table twice with 2 fingers, that ritual I'd memorized, and said, "Apple goes out at 2:10. You don't go near the dock." I wasn't planning to, I lied, and he didn't call me on it because love is sometimes pretending the other person is a better liar than they are. We were ready in the way you're ready for a thunderstorm. The ivory folder sat on my desktop like a heartbeat. The hospital's foundation scheduled an emergency community health panel for next week, which is rich, and the wellness importer posted a photo set of salt lamps lit up like they could save your soul. The Freeport's public page bragged about job creation and art storage, and not once mentioned why you'd build a fortress to keep light out. My hand still hurt. The bruises had turned that dull yellow that says almost done. When I closed my eyes, I could see the map. Green pins, red strings, the pier laid out like a game board. It didn't feel like revenge anymore. It felt like maintenance. The unglamorous work of tightening screws other people loosen on purpose. I took the little black fob off my keys and set it by the window next to Aunt Rose's devotion candle and told myself, again, like a bedtime story, we keep our hands clean. We play the long game. We take yes even when it looks like later. Then we see what comes walking toward the apple. The apple went out at 2:10 like we planned. And I told myself I'd stay the hell away from the docks like I promised. I even tried to be boring, washed Aunt Rose's Tupperware, scrolled Zillow for apartments I couldn't afford, set my phone to Do Not Disturb and put its screen down like a boundary. At 2:37, I decided I needed milk because my brain will apparently walk out into the night for a half gallon if it means pretending nothing's happening. The corner bodega guy was restocking hot Cheetos. The Mets had lost by 2 again on a tiny TV with bad color. I bought milk and a scratcher and told myself I was fine. The van that rolled up outside didn't look like a movie van. It looked like a beat-up city utilities truck with a magnet sign that said Water Authority, in a font that doesn't exist on any municipal website. 2 men hopped out fast, too cheerful, hard hats at night like Halloween. "Ma'am, you Sloan?" one said, like we had an appointment. I didn't answer. I stepped toward the store to put a wall at my back, and the second guy's smile flattened. It wasn't sloppy. What happened? It was professional in the way that's worse because it means practice, a chemical smell, a hood, an arm pin just so that my right hand couldn't find the fob, and my brain did the awful math. This is why you plan even on nights you buy milk. I kept my head loud with details, because memory is a weapon when muscle isn't. The truck turned right, left, then took the long stretch that hums because the asphalt is tired. Somewhere a bridge, because the air went colder and meaner. And then the hood came off, and I was looking at a sign that said Pier 12 in stenciled numbers the color of old gum. Sodium lights made everything the color of nicotine fingers. There were cranes asleep like dinosaurs, and a forklift with a dying backup alarm that beeped late, like it was drunk. I didn't see Marino first. I saw the boots of his men, the kind you buy new to look like you work for a living, and the zip tie cutting my wrists quiet and clean. Then he stepped out of the shadow like a man coming home. He didn't bother with the show. No speech, no shouting, just a face that looked bored and curious at the same time. "Miss Alvarez," he said, and my name sounded wrong in his mouth, like a hymn sung off the key. "You made a mess. And you have something that wipes it clean." I felt small and very awake. "If you mean ivory," I said, "it's not bleach, it's a ledger." One of his guys snorted, the kind of sound that wants to be contempt and lands at juvenile. Marino didn't look at him. He looked at my hands like he was counting the ways I could lie. "I want the keys," he said. "All of them. Not the theater you ran on those screens, the real ones." My throat tried to close. I made my voice work. Ivory doesn't open with one thing. It's a rolling salt that binds to hardware. I said it like a person who's explaining a recipe to someone who can't boil water. "I can open it, not here, not without the device." He nodded once, as if humoring me. "You brought something," he said. And when his man patted down my pockets, he came up with a thumb drive like he'd plucked a coin from a child's ear. "Cute," Marino said, and the man flicked my ear, because some boys don't grow past middle school. I swallowed the instinct to bite. They wanted panic. Panic makes people confess to sins they haven't committed. I took a breath that tasted like rust and old coffee and decided to stop being small. "That won't open it," I said, and made my voice bored to match his. "That one is a training copy with red herrings. It will make you feel like a genius for 12 minutes, and then it will lock and text 6 people you don't want to meet." It was the truth, just not the whole one. He smiled without warmth. "Then what opens it?" I shifted my weight to keep my hands from going numb. A handshake between my machine and the hospital's device that shouldn't exist. "You want to see what's in ivory? We have to be near a live network." "Take her to the office," he said, flicking his fingers like he was bored of me. They pulled me up. My knees worked like new fawns. The office was a prefab box with a window that didn't open and a calendar still on May. There was a green exit sign buzzing over the door, an old PA microphone hanging by a tired wire, and the forklift outside with the backup beeper that lagged half a beat. The room hummed with bad electricity. I could feel the map of it in my teeth. I didn't try to be a hero. I tried to be consistent. "I need to connect," I said, chin at the desk. "Power. A second." They didn't take the zip tie off. They did shove a rickety chair toward me with their feet like I was contagious. I sat. I tipped my head like I was studying the screen, and I let my eyes track the ceiling instead. The exit sign's transformer. The PA wire frayed where the foam tile ended. The conduit that would give if you pulled like you meant it. "This takes focus," I said, and the man nearest me rolled his eyes so hard he almost fell over. "You have 2 minutes," he said. "Less if I get bored." "That's your problem," I said before I could stop myself. He stepped forward, hand up, and I flinched in a way that made me furious at my body for telling the truth. He grinned like he'd won a prize. Tick, tock. I counted my breaths, 5 in, 7 out, until my hands stopped doing that little tremor. Then I moved like a kitchen worker who's about to burn a pan if she doesn't act. Quick, necessary, no apology. I rocked the chair back like I was adjusting, extended my heel, and stomped the forklift horn pedal through the doorway gap, hard, 3 quick, 1 long. The Union Man. Down pattern Lenny taught me in a joke that wasn't a joke. The horn yelped its delayed beep, and the pattern sounded wrong and then right and then wrong, echoing off metal until it sounded like the pier itself was talking. The nearest man swore and went for my ankle. I let him because pain is a tax you pay to buy a second. I used that second to hook the PA wire with the edge of the chair back. It tore with a little scream. I twisted the stripped end into the buzzing block behind the exit sign and let it touch just enough to kiss. The PA spat a high whine that hit me behind the eyes and made the men clap their hands to their ears. That's the thing about cheap hearing protection and aging men who've done loud work. There's a slice of sound their brains hate the most. It's also a frequency cheap hearing assists pick up like a ghost. Lenny's not the only one on this pier who wears one now. And Cass's tracker network listens for the same voltage insult because Theo is a nerd who likes redundancies. The whine cut once, twice, then settled into a tooth. Grind that told me the impulse had gone where it needed to go. They didn't shoot me. They grabbed me and slammed me into the desk hard enough to make the monitor jump and the chair squeal. It hurt, I said to my stupid credit card of a brain. File this for later. Cute, the man said again, which was becoming a theme. And Marino stepped into the doorway, eyebrows up like I juggled. You always make noise when you're scared. Miss Alvarez? Only when I want people to listen, I said. And then a horn somewhere far down the pier answered mine. 3 quick, 1 long, and for a second everyone in the room looked at the door like it had grown a mouth. Cass didn't kick the door in. He doesn't do theater when function works. The first thing I registered was a quiet voice somewhere outside saying, Federal search warrant. Hands visible. And another voice, Theo, murmuring coordinates like he was ordering a pizza. Then the door opened. Not like a movie, like a door. And Cass stood there with his hands empty and his posture making the room feel smaller for the first time. He saw me the way he saw me in the alley, pupils first, then wrists, then the space between me and the men. And he didn't look at Marino until he'd asked me, touch or no? No, I said, because if he touched me, I was going to cry in a way I didn't want these men to see. He nodded. Okay. Then he looked at Marino without hate, which somehow felt more terrifying than if he'd bared his teeth. This is over, he said, like a weather report. Rizzo was behind him, vibrating at a frequency the human body shouldn't maintain. And a woman in a windbreaker with 3 letters on it stood to Cass's left, holding paper like a knife. Federal search warrant, she repeated. And the men who had been so composed suddenly remembered they had hands, and those hands had positions they could take that keep them out of a morgue. Marino tried a smile that didn't get invited to his eyes. You brought the government, he said to Cass, like he'd seen a man choose spinach over steak and didn't know what to do with it. I brought documentation, Cass said, and I brought enough people that we don't have to pretend we didn't hear things. Rizzo's jaw flexed. He wanted to end a chapter with punctuation no court recognizes. Cass didn't move, but Rizzo somehow took a step back anyway. That's leadership, the quiet version. The agent stepped around us, read something off a list, pointed at a stack of drums with the wrong labels, and 2 more jackets peeled off into the dark like sharks who've smelled a specific blood. One of Marino's men made a choice. He grabbed my elbow like a lever, maybe to bargain. Maybe just to feel in control of one thing before the tide took him. Cass's hand moved, and the man's hand wasn't on me anymore. It wasn't flashy. It was a rotation and a pressure and a lesson. No touching civilians, Cass said. And the way he said civilians sounded like he'd scraped that word out of his body with effort and decided to keep it. Marino looked at me like I was a bad investment that had refused to pay out. All this, he said, almost lazy. For empty air? I surprised myself by smiling. You chase nothing, I said. The container's a mirror. The drive you stole is a decoy. The real things you should worry about are boring, receipts, signatures, and a doctor who doesn't forget what she saw. That landed harder than anything I'd said all week. He understood where he couldn't send a lawyer. The next 10 minutes were noise without drama if you weren't inside my skin. Radios, the wet slap of river wind, the snap of plastic evidence bags. Lenny's voice somewhere saying, she's okay. Like he needed to hear it out loud to believe it. My legs remembered they were legs and then forgot again. I did the thing I always judged on TV and leaned over a trash can and got rid of the milk. A tech handed me a bottle of water with the cap off, because kindness is sometimes knowing what someone can't do with their hands tied. Cass asked again, touch or no? And I nodded this time because my body had voted for comfort when my pride wasn't looking. He put his coat over my shoulders without making it a claim. My teeth chattered anyway. They walked Marino past us in cuffs that looked almost silly on a man who spent a life not believing in friction. He didn't look at me again. He looked at the river like maybe it would hand him a do-over. The agent with the list said, Ms. Alvarez will need a statement. And I said, you'll get a timeline, because timelines are the only love language I have left for institutions. Cass stood close enough to be a door and far enough to be a choice. Rizzo lit a cigarette he didn't smoke and let it burn to the filter like he needed to watch something end. Lenny appeared with a foam cup of coffee that tasted like pennies in comfort. 3 quick, 1 long, he said, shaking his head. You crazy? Consistent, I said. And he laughed in that way doc men do when they respect you but won't write it down. On the ride back, the city looked the same because cities don't change when your insides do. Aunt Rosa texted, where are you? And then, immediately after, bring milk. Which made me laugh so hard I scared myself and then cry because I was tired enough to be a person again. Cass didn't talk until we hit Washington, and the light turned red for longer than made sense. You kept your hands clean, he said. Not a question. You did, too, I said, which was the heavier sentence. He drummed 2 fingers on the steering wheel exactly twice and let the rest of whatever he wanted to say stay inside his mouth. The fob sat heavy in my pocket. The exit sign's wine was still in my bones. Fear had done its dance and left the room. What came in its place wasn't victory. It was relief with a job list. Tomorrow there would be depositions in press who smell blood and union men who needed to see this wasn't a trick. Tonight there was a kitchen light, a devotion candle by the window, and a half-gallon of milk sweating on my lap like a joke the universe wanted me to get. I got it. I went upstairs. I slept. And I dreamed, for the first time in weeks, about a door that opened when I knocked instead of when I kicked. I kept thinking the after would feel louder, like fireworks or at least a brass band. But the week of the hearing felt like holding your breath under bathwater, muffled, heavy, weirdly domestic in between blasts of fluorescent light. The subpoenas landed like pizza menus shoved under doors. The city slapped an oversight session on the calendar with a title so bland it could sedate a horse, and every outlet with a tripod tried to make the building look noble from the outside. Aunt Rosa ironed my blouse like it might testify for me, tucked a St. Jude card into my pocket, and told me to drink water before I spoke because dry mouth tells the body it's scared. June wrote, "Shut up and pour truth" on a sticky and stuck it to my phone. Cass didn't give me speeches. He sat at my table the night before in a T-shirt with paint on the sleeve from fixing a wall at one of his warehouses and said, "They will ask you questions you already answered on paper to see if you lose your temper on camera. Don't." I told him I wasn't planning to be interesting. He half smiled and tapped 2 fingers on the table like a promise he was keeping to himself. The morning of. I ate a Wawa egg sandwich that tasted like salt and nerves, braided my hair out of my face because vanity is a luxury on record, and walked into a room decorated with flags and microphones and the kind of carpet that's seen more bad apologies than weddings. The chairwoman asked me to state my name for the record. The stenographer looked up like she already knew it. "Sloan Alvarez," I said. And there was a little ripple behind me. The sound of people from my side of town hearing their own last name in a room that usually pronounces it wrong. It didn't start heroic. It started with chain of custody like we practiced. When I received the files, how I made the copies, where the originals sat, who touched what and when, which timestamps were system, and which were human error. The city attorney kept trying to nudge me into saying hack, like he wanted me to wear the outfit his press guy tailored. And I kept saying public record and network mirror and procurement attachments. And every time I said those words, I watched a reporter's eyes glaze and knew that was good. Boring keeps you safe. Then the part with the audio. They played the clip of Captain Yates promising to sign overtime sheets with the TV murmuring in the background. And I watched the officers in the back row do that jaw shift that means you're choosing not to be surprised in public. Dr. Shaw sat behind me on the aisle, the lot, number photocopy in her lap like a small bomb we'd decided not to detonate yet. When they asked about Ivory, I didn't say poetry. I said billing codes and false routing numbers and a hospital foundation that moved money like a shell game. I did not say Marisol. Not in that room. The chairwoman asked me if I was afraid. The easy answer was yes, in a way that sells. The honest answer was, we're past fear. We're at routine. I'm careful, I said. I'm also tired. You could feel that land because half the room was tired too. Of funerals, of press conferences with zero verbs, of being told their grief is a policy problem. They called Brett, which would have been comic if it didn't ache. He came in with a suit that tried to age him 10 years and a jaw so tight it squeaked. His lawyer did the thing where you object in a setting where objections are theater. And the chairwoman, God bless her, let the question hang anyway. Had he been at the gala planning meeting where the wellness sponsor was pitched? He started to say, I don't recall. And then someone put the catering invoice up on the screen with his initials, like a tattoo you forget is visible in summer. His bravado cracked at the edges. He tried genial, and it came off like a Costco sample of remorse. When they asked him about the alley, the room got the temperature of a church at a bad funeral. He looked at the desk, then at his father, Councilman Harlan, who had arranged his face into Concerned City Dad, and he said, I was not there, in a way that made the oxygen blink. I didn't turn around. I listened to the stenographer type that sentence, like she was laying a track someone else would walk on later, 2 seats over. A woman from the U.S. Attorney's Office took a note and slid it under a folder labeled Exhibits B. K. I didn't get the satisfaction of a courtroom gasp or a handcuff clicking in that moment. What I got was better. A public lie on a public record. Paper is patient. It waits for its day. Yates didn't get a question. He got read a warrant. Watching a man who thought he owned midnight get served at noon has a dumb, quiet justice to it I can't teach. Like seeing a bully put their tray away for the first time in years. If you want the messy human part, it was in the hallway. Reporters form that sloppy horseshoe they always form. Somebody shoved a mic at my mouth and asked if I had a message for young women who put themselves in danger by walking alone at night. I laughed, an actual laugh that frightened me with its size, and said, my message is for men who think streets are souvenirs. June whooped from behind a bailiff and then covered her mouth like she'd burped in church. An older woman in a maintenance uniform, name tag said Denise, touched my elbow on her way past and pressed a butterscotch into my palm like we were 8 at a barber shop. For your throat, honey, she said, and kept walking like she hadn't just held me together with a single candy. Out on the steps. The same podcaster who used Patriot like a seasoning tried to get a clip of Cass being the real power behind this little project. Cass said nothing useful. He said, we're auditing our house, and then introduced the accountant who uses words like controls and segregation of duties. And I watched 90% of the cameras aim back at me like a bad magnet, because a man choosing boredom on purpose is unfilmable. The union vote happened that night in a hall that smells like over-brewed coffee and paper banners. Marino's ghosts weren't there to sway anyone. Fear was, money was, habit was. Lenny spoke once, short. You want to be furniture or you want to be workers? It wasn't eloquent, it was effective. The yes pile won by a handful you could count with your fingers. After, a kid barely old enough to shave came up to me with grease under his nails and said, my mom wants me to quit, but I like the river. I told him the truth. Me too. Make it a place she can stand to visit. He grinned like a kid who just did the math on his first paycheck and didn't cry. That grin was better than a headline. Cass's public pivot wasn't a pivot so much as a refusal. He pulled Vail Logistics out of every gray market lane with a statement that fit on one page, hired a third. Party firm, with a name nobody remembers because that's not the point, and sat through a community forum where 3 grandmas yelled at him about trucks idling on their block. He didn't defend himself. He wrote down their cross streets and said, you're right, Rizzo looked like he was chewing gravel for a week. Then I watched him reroute a convoy himself at 3 a.m., so a school bus route would stop getting boxed in. And he spat on the ground like compassion had given him heartburn, and I loved him for it a little. The first clean audit checkpoint came back with notes, not fireworks. And Cass taped it to a wall where his people clock in, so they could see their names next to progress like a scoreboard that matters. Brett's charge hit the docket 2 days later. Assault, witness intimidation, a handful of white-collar nouns he didn't understand when he threw them around as threats. Councilman Harlan announced he wouldn't seek re-election to better support his family, which is what people say when they've been told to leave before the door learns their shape. The hospital placed their CFO on leave, pending an internal review, which told me their lawyer found the same billing codes I did and started counting backward with a sick feeling. The wellness importer put their Instagram on private, which is the modern version of boarding up a window and hoping a hurricane forgets your address. Captain Yates was walked at dawn with the sun in his eyes so he couldn't perform. None of it brought a band. It brought space. People in my neighborhood started looking straight ahead again when they walked past the halo. June reopened on a Wednesday with a chalkboard that said Beer 4, Truth Free. Maya, the server who handed me the apron at the gala, put in an application, and June hired her before she finished the form. On her first night, a man tried to tip her with a phone number, and she looked at him like a teacher over glasses and said, "We take cash, sir." The bar clapped because small victories deserve the same applause as indictments. If you're wondering about me and Cass, we learned to inhabit the quiet together. He doesn't say I told you so. I don't say why didn't you. We walk Washington at night like we own exactly our bodies and the block between the bodega and Aunt Rose's door. He'll stop sometimes and buy a scratch, off and lose on purpose to make the guy behind the counter laugh. I'll tilt my head and listen for trains because I like the way the low whistle makes the city sound like a bigger story than my own. In the kitchen, when it's late and the candle is half an inch shorter than yesterday, I'll catch Cass reading a draft of the community benefits clause his lawyer wants in the Newport contract. A slice of every shipment to fund clinics, school HVAC, Narcan trainings, stuff that keeps people breathing. And he'll say without pomp, if I'm going to be on paper, I want it to be this kind of paper. I told him to put it in and to make the fund board mostly women who will not let him forget who the money is for. He said, "Already did," and nudged the folder at me with the corner of a smile. The last thing I'll tell you about that week is small, and it's the only part that made me cry in a way I didn't hate. A girl came into the halo at the end of my shift. High school hoodie, backpack straps digging a little too deep into her shoulders, and asked if we had a bathroom. She washed her hands for a long time like she was trying to scrub off a day, then came out and put 2 crumpled dollars on the bar and said, "My mom listens to your podcast when she cleans. She says your voice sounds like our block." I said thank you and meant it like a prayer. She asked if it gets better. I didn't lie. "It gets more possible," I said. "And some days that's better than better." She nodded like she understood something most adults don't. When she left, June slid me a club soda with lime and said, "Too possible." I touched my glass to hers, then took out the St. Jude card from my pocket and set it by the register next to the tip jar and the butterscotch from Denise. Small saints for small rooms. Outside, the city kept doing what cities do, making noise, breaking things, fixing some, forgetting, remembering. Inside, I felt, finally, solidly, proud without apology. Justice hadn't sung, it had cleared its throat, and we were, all of us, still here to hear it. The noise faded the way summer ends in this town, slow, sideways, with one last hot day you didn't plan for. The halo went back to smelling like wings and bleach and the cheap soap we buy in bulk. And the regulars went back to arguing about the Mets in that affectionate way people do when they've already decided to forgive next season. I slept like a person who isn't waiting to be woken by footsteps, fixed Aunt Rose's leaky sink with a YouTube video and 3 swear words, and started building something I'd talked about like a someday for too long. We called it quiet signal because the loud stuff gets attention. Sure, but most of the real work happens under 20, 5 lumens in rooms with bad carpeting. It's not a brand, it's a kit and a promise. A small fund for whistleblowers so your first call can be to a lawyer, not your landlord. Drop in digital hygiene clinics at the library with stickers that say 2FA is love. A boilerplate for open. Records requests that doesn't read like you need a secret handshake. Narcan trainings on Tuesday nights where we feed you pizza because nobody should have to pick between dinner and learning how to save a life. We launched in the basement of the Rosedale Public Library because it smells like old stories and Lysol and kids doing homework, which felt right. Cass paid for the first year and refused to let his name go on anything. He sat in the back under a bulletin board full of PTA flyers, baseball cap low, and listened while Aunt Rosa opened with a prayer that worked whether you believe or not. Dr. Shaw spoke second and didn't say Marisol's name. She said, dignity and charting what you know, and your eyes are yours. Maya ran sign, in, and made the room laugh with a story about the hacker apron that got me out of the ballroom. A public defender whose haircut screamed, "I haven't had time for a haircut," explained subpoenas like he was reading a recipe. People ask the questions nobody on TV ever answers. Will they follow me home? Who do I tell? What if my boss is my cousin? We didn't fix anyone's life in 90 minutes. We made leaving feel possible. That counts. Boundaries at home looked less heroic, but felt bigger. I kept waiting for the old ache to ask us to reenact it. The toxicity. The possessive mine dressed up as protection. But Cass never reached for it. And I didn't either. We made rules nobody will make a movie about. Tell me where you're going because I worry, not because I own you. If we're fighting, we stop when either one of us says we're not our best selves and revisit when we can pick words instead of weapons. If one of us reaches for violence as language, we call a friend before we speak. It sounds corny until it saves you. One night I found a spare key under my doormat with a note in his handwriting. This is not a demand. This is a choice. I laughed and put it on my ring next to the black fob in the grocery store club card. I told him I'd use it for kielbasa emergencies and nights when bravery is too big a word for what I have to give. He said, "Kielbasa emergencies are my love language," and kissed my forehead like a contract. The city signed the Newport contract with a community benefits clause that reads like a shopping list, clinic funding, HVAC for schools that have kids fainting in September, training hours, so union guys don't have to choose between a shift and learning how to not die. A scholarship in Marisol's name for nurses who can't afford to sit for boards because life got expensive. At the forum where they announced it, Grandma Lydia from down the block stood up and yelled about trucks idling by her hydrangeas, and Cass wrote down her cross street and told her she wasn't wrong. And then the next morning, I watched Rizzo reroute a convoy at 4:30 a.m. and swear in Italian about hydrangeas with the intensity of a man who's found out he prefers sleeping to arguing. The Freeport issued a statement full of nothing and hired a crisis firm and put up nicer art on their website. The hospital quietly updated its procurement policies and mailed glossy flyers about the future of care. I stuck one on the corkboard under a big NO, so I remember what apologies without verbs look like. I went to speak at a community college because a professor who listens to the podcast thought I'd help her kids figure out why civics isn't just a chapter in a book. The auditorium smelled like stale popcorn and Sharpie. I told them I wasn't there to sell heroism. I was there to sell boring. You think justice is a speech, I said, because TV taught you to expect the music to swell. Mostly, it's receipts and phone trees and the same email but with a different subject line. And sometimes it's walking to your car with your keys in your hand in a way that your mom taught you, and being mad about that while you also do it because staying alive is a revolution we repeat. A kid with a skateboard under his chair asked if I ever wanted to burn it all down. Absolutely, I said. But then you get hungry and you remember you like empanadas. And there's no empanadas without a building that stays up. So we learn how to turn rage into paperwork. They laughed. Something in me unclenched because teenagers smell fake before perfume does. On the way out, a girl stopped me, tiny, fierce eyebrows, the kind of backpack that tells you she's carrying more than books. "My brother OD'd last year," she said, and didn't cry. I did. Later. I want to do something that doesn't feel like screaming into a hole. I handed her a flyer for Quiet Signal and told her about Tuesday nights. Bring whoever you need to bring, I said. There's pizza. I'm vegan, she said. There's pizza with vegetables, I said. And she smiled like maybe tomorrow isn't a cliff. The email came at 1:12 a.m. because apparently the people who write menacing emails have the same insomnia I do. It was short. Ivory was tier 1. You ready for the parking garage? No signature. No IP that wasn't a shrug. I stared at the subject line, levels, like a parking deck where laughter echoes, and felt that old familiar coil at the base of my neck, the one that smells like both fear and a dare. I didn't run to the laptop. I wrote it down on an index card because ink calms me down. And I went to the kitchen where Cass was fixing the broken hinge on Aunt Rosa's broom closet, because being useful is how he prays. I handed him the card. He read it, jaw doing that thing it does when he's choosing. We knew it was a floor, not a ceiling, he said. Yeah, we've got better shoes now, he said, and went back to the hinge because hinges are a metaphor if you want them to be, and a hinge if you don't. Quiet Signal got a drop box at the laundromat between the ATM and the corkboard with babysitting numbers. It's not high tech. It's a little metal mouth with a slot just big enough for a flash drive or a note. I sat there a few Saturdays in a row with a roll of quarters and a sweatshirt that says City Kid and watched people decide if they could trust an object. A man about my dad's age put in an envelope and then sat in his car for 20 minutes, gripping the wheel like he needed to physically hold the choice. Denise from City Hall, she of the butterscotch, stopped by with a box of candy and a new stack of Know Your Rights pamphlets she stole from a boring training. We kept a ledger like a church bake sale in a chain of custody, like an FBI agent. Boring and sacred can be the same thing. At the Halo. June added Quiet Signal nights to the chalkboard once a month, and we brought in whoever could help. A woman from legal aid who can smell a landlady's scam through drywall. A kid from the library who lives to fish malware out of old phones. An old man who taught half the room how to say no out loud and mean it without apologizing. Sometimes Cass hovered in the back looking like a doc, and sometimes he didn't come at all because not centering himself is another way he learned to love me. When he did show up, men who used to try to shake his hand like it was a test asked him where to buy earplugs for their kids' band practice. And he'd pull up a link and talk about decibels because people are allowed to change lanes without apologizing to strangers. We had a block party that wasn't a party so much as an excuse to feed each other in the street and listen to a teenager with a borrowed amp sing Springsteen songs better than the jukebox ever did. The union brought hot dogs, Aunt Rosa made arroz con gandules, somebody's uncle played dominoes like he owned the table and yelled at Cass for cutting the limes wrong. And I watched the man who used to solve problems with fear laugh and ask for a lesson. Maya danced with a girl I hadn't seen before, and nobody made it a thing. Lenny taught my self-defense class how to say back off, in a voice that fills a hallway. The kid from the community college brought her vegan pizza, and I ate a slice and lied that it was good because kindness is a currency too. We didn't chant. We didn't give speeches. We just lived in public with enough joy to make room for the hurt without letting it take the whole table. The night after the block party, I found Cass sitting on the stoop with a shoebox. Inside, the St. Jude card Aunt Rosa tucked in my pocket. The butterscotch from Denise wrapped in lint and love, the napkin with Lenny's Sharpie number, a co-fi receipt for $25, and a note that said, P-year 6, T3, end, the first printed page of ivory with my handwriting telling me to breathe. I'm not keeping trophies, he said, like he was guilty of something. I'm keeping the map we used to get here, in case we need to walk back and help somebody else. I told him that's not morbid. It's a trailhead. And he kissed my temple and said, Okay, Ranger. And I elbowed him for making me soft. People ask what we are now, which is funny because it assumes we weren't already. I tell them we're two stubborn kids grown into two stubborn adults who decided to make their stubborn useful. He still taps 2 fingers on tables when he's holding back the part of him that could close a room with a look. I still fix things with YouTube and salt and the lie that 3 zip ties are as good as a screw. We still fight about dumb stuff like whether cilantro tastes like soap and who left the radiator on and which route to take when the jug handle snarls. And we still pick the fight we can win together. When the email at 112 says the garage has more levels. If you want a ribbon to tie around this, I won't sell you one. I'll tell you about the Tuesday night, where I watched a girl bring her mom to a Narcan training and both of them shook. And then they laughed because the instructor said, "This is easy, you can do this." And they did. I'll tell you about the morning a union guy brought us a receipt that looked boring until it didn't, and we added it to a folder labeled Tusk, because if Ivory has cousins, we'll be ready. I'll tell you about the way Aunt Rosa prays over my laptop without making a face like she's worried about blasphemy. I'll tell you about the door at the Halo. We fixed the hinge. It opens without kicking now. And I'll tell you what Cass says when he catches me staring at the river like I'm counting ghosts. "We choose the light," he says. Simple as toolbox wisdom. Every time we have a choice, we choose it. I say okay. I say it like a vow. And then I close the laptop, tape another flyer to the laundromat corkboard, and walk home with the sound of trains and frying oil and people who made it through another day. All of us a little less alone